Hello, everyone. Welcome to another Techstrong learning experience. This is a very special edition. I'm really happy. I've been looking forward to hosting this one. For those of you who follow our webinars, you know I don't host a lot of webinars anymore. But every once in a while, I like to dust off the sports jacket and come on and do a webinar, and especially if it's one that I find interesting. And I hope you're going to find this one as interesting as I do. You know, and this is the first in a series of learning experience webinars we're going to be doing with our friends at AWS, and specifically within the AWS serverless realm. And you know, the whole notion of serverless is for some people they think they know it, but they don't. Other people know they don't. You know, they don't know what they don't know. Other people know what they don't know. Or know that they don't know, but they got to know. And then some people know it. But we're going to jump into all of that today. And we got a really special guest I'm going to introduce you to here in a second. Before we do jump into it, though, I wanted to just take a minute or two to go over the interface, the parameters, how this experience is going to work today. You know, we use the Big Marker webinar platform here at Techstrong. And the reason we do is I think it has the best communication interface of all the webinar platforms we've worked with. And for most of you, that means in the right-hand corner of your browser, you're going to see a box or a window. And for most of you, chat will be in bold black, and Q&A and is grayed out. Some of the others are grayed out. And then underneath chat, there are different flavors of chat, right? There are public, presenter, or private chat, and Twitter. We're not using Twitter. Let me tell you, they haven't updated their branding, I guess, to say X yet. But we're not using it anyway, so don't worry. But the idea behind today's event is that you, our audience, get the opportunity to drive this event. Your questions, your comments, your thoughts are incorporated into the webinar, into the learning experience, so that you can get your questions answered, and we make sure we hit what you want us to hit. Now, a lot of you have logged on already and taken the opportunity, and I apologize, of course, the office phone that never rings. A lot of you have taken the opportunity to say thanks for joining and where you're from. And you know what? Since I've been on the internet in the late 90s, I've always gotten a kick to see where people log on from, because no matter where I am in the world, there's a big world out there. And so it fascinates me to see we have people from Greece just logging on, and Essen, Germany, and Utah, and Boston, and you know, Finland. Hello to Finland. Everywhere else. Thank you. But that chat's to be used for more than just telling us where you're from. Once we get started, I want you guys to ask your questions, make your comments. Let's hear your thoughts about what we're talking about today, because you will make this webinar great, not only for yourself, but for everyone else. So there's only so much I could do. There's only so much Nick, who I'm going to introduce you here, could do. I need you to make this webinar great. And you do that by being an active participant. Let's hear what you got. Let's hear your thoughts on serverless. You have questions, this is the place to ask. So with that being said, I think I mentioned it earlier, but I'll say it again. Today, which again is the first in a series of webinars we're going to be doing on this subject, it's Unlock Developer Productivity and Operational Simplicity with Serverless. Our special guest, is Nick Colt. Nick, welcome to a Techstrong Learning webinar. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, super excited to be here. This is, I love hearing directly from folks and the questions that they have. I think that's the part of this that I'm most looking forward to is honestly the questions coming in from the audience to see where the discussion goes. Let me just, introduce myself briefly in my role. So I lead product management for what we call serverless compute at AWS. And that includes a set of products, and we'll get into like what are all the different products that are in that portfolio. But It's a big part of what we call serverless at AWS, and so I've been involved in that, in various flavors of that for quite a while now at AWS, and super excited to answer questions and tell people where we've been, where we are, and where we're going, and talk about the journey that folks are on with serverless.
Absolutely. And Nick, I want to just, though we mentioned developers and developer in the title, we get that a lot of developers are working in serverless, but in today's world of application modernization and development, there's platform engineers and SREs and testers that we all want to make sure they understand what serverless is, right? And how it can be used and what maybe some of the best practices are and stuff. So I want to just say from the outset to our audience that, hey, we're not looking necessarily for serverless experts today. So don't be afraid to ask what you think is a very rudimentary question, because we're going to start off real rudimentary, I'll tell you that. So please ask your questions. Don't be afraid to think that it's too elementary, or there are no bad questions, as they always told us in school, right?
Yeah. In fact, the most elementary questions, I think, are often the most interesting ones.
Yep.
Because they get right at the heart of what we're really talking about. Not that I don't want the nitty-gritty, detailed, super high-end questions too. Those are great too. They're different. But I love the real getting at the core of the matter questions. So folks, don't be afraid to ask anything.
Yep. All right. So Nick, if it's okay, I'm gonna ask the first couple of questions. And I'm going to do so first I want to poll the audience really quickly. And guys, look, it would be nice if you answered. I'm not telling you have to, but please try to answer. It's a very simple question. Do you feel confident in your definition of serverless? And if you could click on polls here. If you go to polls in your chat, Cody, is it working well? I don't know.
I saw the question. I wasn't sure whether I should click to or not.
You could click it. Fantastic. Guys, go ahead, click, because that's going to be the first question for Nick. Well, what is exactly serverless, Nick? And I thought it'd be nice to understand a little bit from our audience if they feel confident in their definition of what is serverless. And it's interesting. We don't have a lot of people voting, and that's okay, but we're right at 50-50 here.
Yeah.
So that's I'll be honest, it's pretty much what I expected. Right? Yeah. I think we've heard of it, and of course, especially in terms of AWS, when we think of serverless, we think Lambda as well. We're going to get into Lambda, but Nick, there you have it. Half of these folks, they're not really sure about their definition of serverless. So help us. What is serverless?
Yeah, it's and I don't want to claim that I have the one true answer for what serverless is. There's lots of different ways that people think about serverless out there in the world, and what I'd rather do is just tell you how I think about it and how we think about it at AWS, what we think of as serverless, which I think resonates with a lot of folks. So serverless is not about one specific technology choice. It's not about, well, use this particular product or service and then you're serverless, and if you don't use that, you're not serverless. It's really about a mindset. It's about an operational model. To put it in a bit more sort of fluffy terms, it's a way of life. It's what kind of way of life do you want to have when you talk about building, deploying, and operating your applications. And so, what things do you want to have responsibility for, and what do you not want to have responsibility for? And in the serverless world, as the name implies, number one, you're not responsible for servers. Like, to put it very simply, you aren't responsible for servers, for managing servers, for installing operating systems on servers, for patching servers. Instead, in the serverless world, you focus on your application. you put your application first, because that's the thing that really matters. If you're a developer, if you're a business that's using software that's critical to your business, which today it's hard to find a business that isn't using software that's critical to their business, right? You care about that. You don't care about the servers that are sitting there that are running that software. Like that doesn't matter. And so the more you can spend time on the things that matter and the less time you can spend on things that don't matter to your business, the faster you're going to move. And that's what serverless is all about. Helping you focus on the things that matter and not spend time on the things that don't matter. So that's I know maybe not as precise of a definition of serverless as some people would like, but that's really how we think about it at AWS. And what I like about that definition is that it's a more enduring, like long-term definition of serverless than it would be if you focused on one specific type of technology.
Absolutely. Guys, what do you think of Nick's answer? Put it in the comments, questions. If that has caused your brain to think a little bit, it's spawned some questions, please. Let's see what we've got out here from you folks. But Nick, I want to zero in a little bit specific to AWS. I mentioned Lambda before. Again, a term that probably a lot of people in our audience have heard. And a lot of people say, well, Lambda is synonymous with serverless. But let's specifically talk about the AWS definition of it.
Yep. So it's true that Lambda, I think it's fair to say Lambda was, probably one of the earliest services out there where serverless became a term that people were using. And so Lambda is what we call serverless functions. And that was really a completely new model of building and deploying software. The idea that what you deployed was not, a bunch of packages running on a VM. What you deployed was a function. Like if you're familiar with programming, it's literally like a function written in a programming language, and that's what you deployed. And so Lambda kind of invented that idea of serverless as a function. And for a long time, that the two were synonymous. Like serverless functions was serverless. But here at AWS, we're constantly looking at, okay, we saw how much people love Lambda and the things that they didn't have to do when they use Lambda and the things that they could then spend their time on. And we're asking ourselves, well, how else can we double down on that? How else can we expand those kind of benefits? And so, you look at the world of containers, which containers became popular around the same time that serverless did and Lambda launched, is when containers really started to take off. And what we thought is, could we make containers serverless? And so we launched Fargate, which is a way to take a container, what is a container? A container is really a software package with a process that you want to run. And we said, well, let's let you deploy that software package and run that software without having to go spin up a server and manage the operating system and deal with all of that. And so Fargate is serverless containers as opposed to serverless functions, right? Mm-hmm. It's not the same programming model as serverless functions, but it's got, if you keep in mind that serverless is a mindset and an operational model, then Fargate is just as serverless as Lambda is, right? It's got the similar kind of benefits where you're focused on your software and not on the infrastructure that's needed to run that software.
Absolutely. A couple of questions from the audience, and two of them looks like David. They're that prototypical cloud thing, which is, so serverless is just another way of avoiding responsibility. The other guy's taking care of it, whatever it is. Well, yes and no, right? Because cloud in general, to me, when we talk about in that context, is about shared responsibility, right? There are some things that the cloud provider is responsible for, generally in that hardware stack, right? And then depending where you come in, you might come in at the OS level. You might come in below the OS, above the OS, but it's a shared responsibility model, isn't it, Nick?
Yeah, and there isn't a one size fits all answer for every customer. Every customer, we have so many customers in so many different industries, and the needs are different. And so, we never say to our customers, here is the one true way to do things. If you need to run a custom operating system on a bare metal server because your application has such specific requirements that you need to do that, we're very happy to help you do that. That's not serverless. That's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. If that's what you need, go do that. But I would say that the pattern that we've seen and the trend that we've seen is that there's fewer and fewer customers that want to do that. They just don't want to because they realize, how is this actually helping my business? How is this actually helping me deliver software faster to my customers, right?
Sure.
And if it's not helping you do that, then you really got to question why you're doing it. Of course, I mean, nobody is trying to say that with serverless, there literally are no servers anywhere. Of course, there are servers, but we are responsible at AWS for, racking those servers in the data center. We're responsible for ensuring that they're running a secure operating system and keeping the patches up to date on that operating system. We're responsible for, all the different things that you have to do to manage infrastructure. And a lot of customers are finding that those things that you have to do to manage infrastructure, it's just not core to their business. And so why would they spend time on that if they don't have to?
Agreed. And, as a rule, I think you hit Raul's question, which is if AWS is managing my servers or, a company's servers, am I really serverless just because they're managing it? Or is serverless more about I'm on this particular platform with these particular functions?
So it's we take at AWS and at Amazon, we take a customer-centric view. And so when we say serverless, again, we're not trying to say, you can run software without a server anywhere. Obviously you need a computer to run software, right? There's no way to getting around that. That's kind of a law of physics. But does the customer have to care about the servers? No. With serverless, the answer is no, you don't. You don't have to care about the servers. If you want to care about the servers, or you have an application or a business where you have to care about the servers, that is a model that we 100% support and that lots of customers are still doing. And there's nothing wrong with that. I'm not trying to tell everyone that you must use serverless, right? It's not about that. It's that a lot of customers want to use serverless because they get the benefits of, all this team of people that they had to spend time on what we call undifferentiated heavy lifting. Those people can now spend their time on actually adding features and capabilities to their application or helping their business move faster.
Yeah. I mean, our friend David's back here with a couple of comments, questions, and I feel like we're doing a little therapy with him here. But, most but not all of his programming career was when the business had abdicated the application and just toss it over the transom and IT will take care of it. So I think an important distinction, and, cloud is simply the abdication. But, when we're talking about serverless, we're not necessarily talking about the application or managing the application. In fact, we're not. We're talking about the underlying infrastructure, the stack that the application runs on. But the end user, David or someone else, the IT department, perhaps the business unit itself, they're still responsible for running that application, aren't they?
Yeah. And in fact, one of the other terms that I like to use when I talk about serverless is application first. That serverless enables you as the customer to be application first. And application first means the application that you're building and deploying and operating, that's the thing that is helping your business. That's the thing that is helping your enterprise. That's where your differentiated value is. Like so many businesses today are software businesses at the heart of it. And the software that they build and operate is where they're differentiating. And so the more you can spend your time on that, the more successful you are, right? The more you can leverage the resources you have to make your app better, to deliver new features faster, right? Think about the world today, how rapidly things are changing, right? In the last, 4 or 5 years, I mean, we had all these global events that were changing what people needed in their daily lives. We had inflation, energy prices. Now Gen AI is getting out there. Now suddenly you've got to try to build Gen AI into your applications. And so as a business, your ability to respond quickly to those changes is critical to your success. And so the faster you can move and the faster you can have your developers, or if you're a developer, the faster you can move, the more you're going to help that application be successful out there in the world.
Absolutely.
And so it's actually kind of 180 degrees opposite of the idea of abdicating the application.
Exactly.
In fact, it is saying the application is the thing that is the most
And that's what you got to work on. Yep, I agree. Another thing I'll mention is when we talk about managing the infrastructure, managing the environment and guardrails. Yes, the cloud provider, in this case AWS, plays a big role in there. But one of the hot things we hear a lot about now is, of course, platform engineering.
Mm-hmm.
And the whole way that platform engineering, and maybe we're getting a little ahead of ourselves, I apologize, but the way, excuse me, that platform engineering interacts with serverless goes to more than just the application itself. It goes to the very heart of the platform, hence the name, platform engineering. We have a good Q&A I want to come back to in a second, but Nick, can you talk a little bit about the relationship between platform engineers, platform engineering, and serverless?
Yeah, so a platform engineering team, and some folks on the call here may already be familiar with that term, but if you're not, most commonly what platform engineering means is that, and you see this more at larger enterprises, you may have 10, 20, 100 internal teams that are all building different applications or different components of a larger application. And when you're small, the developers can just go build and nobody has to worry about things. You get bigger and you need to start caring about consistency. Like, let's make sure that, when we deploy software, we're all doing it in the same way, for example. Because then when something goes wrong, you've got run books and things that you can use so that consistently, okay, how do we roll back if there was a problem, for example. Or you look at things like security, right? And if you start small and maybe you don't care as much about compliance because you're just trying to move fast, you get big and now you're being audited and you got compliance things you got to deal with. And so you have to make sure that everybody's doing things in a way that's compatible with the compliance regime that you're in. And so what a platform engineering team does is it builds guidance, it builds guardrails, it builds what we would call golden path for developers to enable developers to keep moving fast while ensuring that there's consistency and there's compliance in place to do the things in the right way. That term, the platform engineering team, has kind of evolved over time. I think maybe 4 or 5 years ago, it was very much a top-down, like, okay, we've decided this is how you're going to do things, and you must fit in with the way that we're doing this. And I'm seeing a lot of platform teams taking more customer-centric approach, where they say, well, our customers are the app teams, they are the developers, and we got to build our platform to meet the needs of those customers. And so, what you're increasingly seeing when it comes to serverless and platform teams is you got a lot of app teams saying, well, we love serverless. We know how to use Lambda, we know how to use Fargate, and they'll come to the platform team, and the platform team then needs to make sure that the portal that they're building or the system that they're building supports those serverless capabilities. And what the platform teams are finding is it saves them time too, because in a more traditional infrastructure-centric world, the platform team has to spend a lot of time setting up infrastructure, setting up clusters of servers, setting up monitoring and security for clusters of servers. They have to do things like, oh, there's a new vulnerability announced in the version of Linux that we're using. We got to go make sure that all our servers are patched. Right. And that's I mean, we have customers running thousands, tens of thousands more of servers, with hundreds of different teams internally. Go try to patch 10,000 servers and get those app teams to go do all of that, right? Like that's a lot of work in itself. And so the platform teams are finding that it makes them faster too.
Sure.
Because now there's a bunch of infrastructure management tooling that they just don't have to have.
Mm-hmm. So Nick, I want to move us along. There was a good comment they'll put up in the QA. I want to just acknowledge it and quickly get your thoughts. Can we say that customized compute engines with inbuilt auto scaling capability scale in and out can be equated to serverless?
I would say
be like all spaghetti's macaroni, but not all macaroni is spaghetti. But you're the expert.
I mean, it's certainly, I would say, on the spectrum in that I think, you get a lot of the benefits there. However, the shared responsibility model is a key distinction point there. So in the shared responsibility model for AWS, as we mentioned that before, there's a very clear dividing line between what AWS is committed to being responsible for and what the customer agrees that they need to be responsible for. And if you have a auto scaling set of servers that automatically scales in and out to meet the demand for compute capacity, that has a lot of the benefits of serverless. But if those servers are owned and managed by you, then the customer is actually responsible for the operating system, for example, applying patches to that operating system. And there are many cases where the customer prefers that model because they want to have, very precise control over exactly what is running on those servers. And if that's what you need, you should do that. But I would argue that probably is not actually serverless because of the shared responsibility distinction, that what goes on inside that VM is your responsibility, right? And that has benefits, but it has drawbacks. And one of the drawbacks is that means that's something that you have to make sure you've got the right processes set up to handle. But I don't want to claim that there is some sort of 100% clear, bright dividing line here, or that I have the one true definition of serverless. There are certainly things that feel serverless-ish. Mm-hmm. And I mean, even with Fargate and Lambda, right? Like there's, there are distinctions between Fargate and Lambda where there's things that you don't have to think about with Lambda that you do with Fargate. I would still call them both serverless, but there's different degrees of what you're responsible for within those services.
Agreed. One of the things I love about this format is when attendees start answering other attendees' questions and comments, and we got some of that going on. I appreciate all of you guys doing that. It's interesting stuff. But Nick, I want to kind of move us along a little bit here, and it's been a couple of years. It's been a hot minute since serverless and Lambda and stuff was introduced, and we've seen some changes, some evolution to the platform, if you will. And increasingly, that evolution and those changes are geared towards serverless being sort of a preferred choice, a preferred platform for application modernization, for modernizing app development. Can you talk a little bit about some of those changes and how it's influenced that?
Sure, yeah. So there's a couple different things wrapped into that question. One is the concept of modern applications, and then the other is kind of like how has serverless evolved over time. So I talked a little bit about that with the introduction of serverless functions in Lambda, and then we added serverless containers with Fargate. And the trend that we're seeing over time, and you hinted at this, is when customers adopt serverless and they start to see the benefits, they realize they want to run more stuff on serverless. They're like, well, can't we run everything we have on serverless? Can't we get more things to run on serverless? And when they do that, then they start to see, well, okay, this application, it needs what looks like a disk to the operating system. It needs some storage. Or this application needs more memory. This application needs more CPU power. This application needs a certain type of networking configuration. And so what we've done over time is we've added core capabilities in those areas, especially in storage and compute, to where, for example, people run Windows, right? There's a lot of applications out there that run on Windows, and you've got your Windows app, and you'd still like the benefits of serverless. So we said, well, why can't we make Fargate run Windows containers? So we added that capability. Or customers needed persistent storage with Lambda, where they got their function and it's a stateless function. However, it's serving up content or it's doing computations that require access to data that's not going to change over time. So we added support for elastic file system. It's basically like a network shareable file system that each Lambda function can have access to when it runs. And so we've been investing continuously and kind of adding to the different capabilities that you can access through serverless. And that in turn has expanded the types of applications that you can run on serverless compute with Lambda and Fargate. And we're continuing to do that. I mean, this is a continuous innovation here to just bring the benefits of serverless to more and more applications and more customers.
Yep.
Now, the other aspect is the idea of modernization and modern apps. And I don't want to make it sound like there's modern apps and then there's not modern, like somehow the not modern is worse. Like that's not the case. I will say though that what customers find with serverless is they can do things differently than they could before. And that's really what modern apps are about. So a modern app, at least how we define it, is an architecture where your application consists of small components that are loosely coupled. And why does that matter? Why does a small component that's loosely coupled matter? Well, one of them is actually very much about the people and about how you're organized. And this is something that we ourselves at AWS and at Amazon use to move fast. Even though we're a large company, we're able to move very quickly because we ourselves use the same model. And when you have a small component and you have a small team that owns that small component, and it is loosely coupled with the other components in your application, that small team can move fast and ship faster. Because they're not having to say, well, our development cycle has to be tightly coupled with this other team's development cycle, right? When you have multiple teams whose development cycles are all tightly coupled, I mean, I'm sure developers out there all have felt this pain. I want to go merge this branch, but I can't because this other team has to do this other thing first. So I'm sitting here waiting for them, and you're having to do these like really big, long development cycles where everything is tightly coupled. If you can decouple those teams and say, well, look, I can go ship this thing and this team that depends on me doesn't really have to know that I did that, then I can go do that quickly. I can go ship faster. And so a modern app is as much about the people as it is about the technology choice. But there are a lot of benefits on the technology choice as well, because if your app is small components loosely coupled, and as that app scales, let's say you start off and you've got just a few users and you go launch, becomes super popular, and it scales massively. Now you've got this huge number of users. You don't necessarily know in advance, well, how are those different components going to have to scale? Like the usage pattern might be different than you thought it was, and this component over here gets a lot more usage than you thought it would. If these components are loosely coupled with each other, that component can scale up without the other ones having to scale up. And if you're building what we would call a monolith, where everything is just bundled together in one big application, you can't do that. You can't scale up one piece without scaling up all the other pieces. You can't deploy new versions of one piece without deploying new versions of everything, right? So that's really what a modern application is the small components loosely coupled. And what customers find is that serverless is a really easy way to do modern application architectures.
Absolutely. Nick, we've got a very specific question from Rahul. I don't know if you'll have the answer to this, but let's see. Rahul says, we run into issues with auto scaling using Cosmos DB database, especially when we get spikes. If we adjust runs per time during these spikes, it has a considerable impact on costs, which we as a company have to pay for. Not, AWS, of course, they make money from that, so it's a good thing, I guess.
Yeah.
But what advice do you have for Rahul?
Well, it's hard for me to comment specifically on Cosmos DB because I believe that's another cloud provider's product. So I can't. I don't want to offer advice that I'm not qualified to give on that specifically. But I think generally the question is very applicable to serverless, which is the idea of spikes in demand, and that's actually kind of the sweet spot for serverless. Because one of the things that comes along with the operational model of serverless is you pay for what you use, which is a little different than a infrastructure-centric world where you pay for the servers that you're running, whether or not they're doing anything. With serverless, the idea is if you have a spike in demand, then behind the scenes, AWS manages scaling as needed in order to serve that demand. Now, yes, you do pay for that as the customer. Like you do pay for that. It's not free. But the point is that if you don't have a spike, then you're not paying. Unlike in a world where you're running a bunch of servers where you might have to pre-scale in order to meet that demand. And so you're going to have servers sitting there idle, not doing anything, waiting for that spike. And you're paying for those servers, even if they're not actually doing work. And so that's actually one of the key benefits of serverless beyond making developers move faster is actually the cost. That if you have an application that's got really unpredictable, spiky demand, customers find serverless is just awesome at handling that because they can just set up their configuration, set up their functions or their Fargate containers, and they don't really have to think about, well, what if tomorrow we have 10 times as many users as we have today?
Absolutely. Nick, I want to pivot a little bit, but before I do, I want to mention more on event-driven architecture. If our attendees would like to move into the handout section of their communication portal, they will see some handouts, hence the name handouts, some downloads they can get on event-driven architecture, as well as a learn more on AWS serverless. So those are available to you. Just click on them and download them. I don't think you have to register or anything. You just grab them. Thank you for attending today, and it's there. Nick, I want to pivot over. Look, I spend a lot of time talking to users of cloud, of infrastructure, of technology. I spend a lot of time talking to vendors. Everyone agrees that security is a real hot button topic. It's on top of everyone's mind. The platform engineer, the SRE, the ops person, the dev, the DevOps, agile developers, all of them are being told, hey, security is your responsibility. And for some of these disciplines, that's a little bit of a new thing. But, is security different in a serverless environment? Is there serverless security versus rest of the world security? How would you describe that to people?
I mean, first, I would say that security at AWS is job one, job zero, really. Like that comes before everything else. And if we ever get the sense that security isn't where it needs to be, we will just drop everything to go rectify that situation. And we encourage customers, regardless of whether they're running a modern app or a not modern app, whether they're running serverless or they're managing the servers themselves, we offer the complete spectrum of tools and capabilities and guidance to ensure that customers can run securely, period. Like there's no compromising on that. When it comes to serverless, I think what customers find is not so much that, serverless is like more secure than not, because that's not true. They're all equally secure on AWS. It's more about what are you responsible for? And so let me give you kind of a little bit of a story of a specific industry, which is financial services. As you can imagine, financial services security requirements are pretty darn high, right? If you're processing hundreds of billions of dollars of transactions, you really can't afford to have there be an unpatched security problem. And we saw a transformation happen in financial services where, many years ago, the idea of using the cloud was like, wait a second, we're going to use someone else's computers? No, we got to own those computers, because that way we know what's happening with them. And with serverless, we don't have access to the underlying host. We can't log in and look at the logs and make sure that things are happening the way they're supposed to. We can't do that. And then we saw a pivot happen where now what you have customers across the board around the world in financial services saying is, oh, with serverless, I don't have access to that server and I don't have to worry about what's going on that server. Sign me up. Sign me up, because now AWS is handling patching of the operating system, is handling security for me. And AWS has obtained the compliance certificates from the different auditing agencies that are out there. And so I can check the box and be compliant. And there's a whole team of people who were spending time on that don't have to spend time on that. So we have customers like, this is one that is talked about these kind of benefits for a while. Vanguard.com. Probably you've heard of that. They're pretty big in the financial services industry, and they're a big user of Fargate. And one of the reasons why they chose Fargate is exactly what we're just talking about. When Vanguard uses Fargate, they no longer have to be in the business of patching servers. And they're very happy to no longer be in the business of patching servers. So it's not that choosing Fargate made them more secure, because they could be just as secure running a bunch of servers. It's that they don't have to do the work of patching those servers, and it helps them move faster, right? So, the security model in the end is the same level of security with serverless or without. It's how you get there, and what do you have to do to get there?
Absolutely. As someone who founded a company that offered a vulnerability management and workflow patching company, a solution, it doesn't warm my heart, Nick, to know that that's now all being automated and and the platform will take care of it. But as someone who's also spoken to a lot of people who spend a good too much of their day patching and updating and remediating, that's got to be a godsend, right? I mean, it's tough stuff.
And in the model of application first, customer is still responsible for their application. So, if you're running Java or Node.js application and you're using a package that has a vulnerability, we have scanning capabilities like AWS Inspector and Guard Duty and things like that that can inform you about those vulnerabilities. But that part of your software estate is still in the customer responsibility model. So we're not completely removing the need to patch anything with serverless. What we are doing is handling the server part of the patching.
Yep. All right. I'm going to pivot again a little bit here. I don't see any more questions. Well, we do actually, Rahul. Just thank you, Rahul, for your questions. Is patching servers such a big deal? There are companies like Cyber Essentials who provide details on vulnerability scans and general recommendations on remediation. If you don't mind, Nick, I'd like to answer this one. I have a little background. Is it a big deal? Yes, because just patching a server, if it was just a question of patching the server and that server existed in a vacuum, great. But servers don't exist in vacuums and apps don't exist in vacuums. And so every time you apply a patch, you've got to make sure that the application of that patch does not have effects downstream or upstream on everything else you're doing. And not more often, but very often it does. I remember going to Citi. I'll tell you how long ago this was. It wasn't Citi, it was Citibank at the time. They had 3 global CIOs, and I went to sell Citi on this vulnerability management patching solution we had. And I said, Patch Tuesdays had just come out from Microsoft. This is before cloud. And I said, well, how long does it take you to apply a patch? He says, oh, we don't even bother applying the patch for 90 to 120 days, a quarter or more. I said, my God, how do you wait so long? He said, well, we can't afford to break anything. And until we've totally tested it across the board, we won't apply the patch. And so we're not really interested in speed to patch or speed to remediation. And so to answer your question, it's a lot harder than if you're not involved in that, and security people are, and SREs and folks are. If you're not involved in that, believe me, it is. Got another good question, though, if you don't mind, Nick, from Juan. He's saying, so serverless is outsourcing the maintenance of the servers you intend to use, plus virtualization for on-demand resource adjustment, meaning that scaling up and down, which I wanted to talk about. Whatever's on top of that is your responsibility, meaning not AWS, the customer, still running on a virtual server. Is that a fair definition? Back to our poll right off the bat, right when we opened up today.
Yeah, that's certainly one form of serverless. And I would say on AWS, the closest thing to what Juan is describing there would be Fargate, where Fargate, it is a container service. And so Fargate runs containers. So if you have a container image, which really, what is a container image? A container image is actually just a bunch of software packages bundled up in a particular format. And so if you have a container image and you want to run that container image as a container, and a container is really just a process running on a Linux or Windows machine, then Fargate will run your container image as a container, and it will do it in such a way that you don't see the server, you don't have access to the server, you're not charged for the server, you pay for the container that's running. And you have access to that, but not to the host. And so that's probably the closest to what Juan is describing, where it's on-demand resource adjustment, it's virtualization, and we are handling the maintenance of the servers for you, and you don't even have access to the servers at all. They're not a thing as far as the customer is concerned.
Absolutely. Diana, I see you noticed when we talk about patching and remediations, it's not just applications, it's DBs and APIs. Absolutely. As a matter of fact, APIs are probably the soft white underbelly today. A majority of all internet traffic is now API calls. So if you're not locking down, patching, fixing API vulnerabilities, you got big problems. Nick, David asks, is SBOM on AWS's radar? SBOM's on everyone's radar, but I don't know if that's outside your area of expertise.
No, it's not. It's not. I've been in the containers and serverless space for a long time, and so SBOM, for people not familiar with that term, is referring to software bill of materials. Mm-hmm. And so the idea is, when you look at how software works today, it's very rare to find software that is written that has no dependencies on other packages. It's very rare to find a piece of software where it's just a coder sat down, wrote some code, and deployed it, and you didn't use any libraries or packages. Which is, I've been in the industry a long time too, and that's very different, right? Like now to use, you look at the typical Python application, how many different packages does it depend on? And it's this huge list of things that you depend on. And so the idea with software bill of materials is to have a kind of standardized methodology and format for keeping track of what your software dependencies are. That way, when you deploy, you can say, well, do we have any applications that depend on this specific library? And if you have software bill of materials in place, then
search through all your apps.
The concept is you can go tie that package to specific applications that are running.
Absolutely.
I think what we've seen is that at this point, it's still more of a theory than it is a real thing. So, is it on our radar? For sure. But we have not yet really seen customers say, oh, I got to have this because I can't be secure without it, or I can't move faster without it.
Well, the federal government is pushing this, right? CISA and the White House itself. So, look, RSA is coming up in a few weeks. I'll be out in San Francisco. We're doing a thing on DevSecOps and AI, and SBOMs are a big part of this stuff. So I think it's still the standardization, like what languages, what format is the SBOM in, so you can do all of that. There's still a lot of that work being done. Nick, all of a sudden people are waking up here.
Yeah,
at the end, it's always like this. But I've got two other ones. This is a real quick one. If you can keep it short, I don't even know if you know the answer. But are there any serverless solutions which are vendor neutral, allowing for vendor neutrality?
I think, it depends on what you mean by vendor neutrality. I would argue that kind of by definition, a solution is probably something that a company is offering, right?
Yeah.
Are there serverless technologies that are vendor neutral? Fargate, what is Fargate? It runs containers.
Yeah.
Any container that is what we call an OCI compatible container. OCI is kind of the standards body that defines how containers work. Any OCI container image, for the most part, is going to run on Fargate. And you can take that container image, run it on your laptop, run it somewhere in your data center, run it on another cloud provider. It's totally interoperable. And so,
if you don't mind me just one sec, that goes into a question we had over in Q&A, which is how is containerization different from serverless architecture, right? Containerization is almost it's that old platform as a service kind of thing, right? Where it's independent of that underlying infrastructure as a service. And so it one's stacked on the other is how I always explain it. How would you explain it?
So containers and serverless are, I would say, related in the sense that at least what we saw with Fargate was that containerization enabled a new kind of serverless, especially if you think about the application first mentality, meaning you focus on your application first. And what is your application? Your application is software. And it has needs for data and so forth, but at the core of the application is the software. And a container, what is a container? A container is software.
A wrapper. No, that's how I always thought of it, as a wrapper. And look, when we think of containers, a lot of us think of Docker containers and the great work Solomon Hykes did, but it's not. We should realize, right? Containers have been running in Linux for 25 years or something like this, right? The container itself is not new. Sort of what Docker did, and then others have done, and Solomon Hykes was behind this, was made it easier for the developers to build with, right? And for the platform people and everyone to, put infrastructure in. Now, Nick, you mentioned Fargate. We got a question here from our friend David again, and I've seen this question though a lot of times from different people, which is Fargate's Kubernetes. Is that just AWS's Kubernetes, or what's the distinction between Fargate and Kubernetes?
Yeah, so that's a good question.
Sharik has a great one. I don't know if you can see the chat, Nick. You see what Sharik wrote here?
Yep.
AWS Fargate. That's pretty good.
That's true. Yeah. So there are, I would say Kubernetes and Fargate are at different layers of the stack.
Mm-hmm.
So Fargate is how do the containers actually run? Kubernetes is all about what we would call orchestration, which is what containers should you be running in the first place? When should they start up? When should they shut down? And how do you deploy them? And in fact, Kubernetes, specifically AWS's managed Kubernetes offering, which is called EKS, actually works with Fargate. So you've got EKS, which is our managed Kubernetes offering, deciding, okay, how many containers should run? When should I start ones up? When should I shut them down? But when those containers actually run, you can have them run on Fargate.
Great.
The advantage being, again, just like we said before, they're running on Fargate. There's no host to patch or manage. You still get the benefits of serverless there with Kubernetes.
Great. Nick, I want to jump from sort of the platform engineering container stuff back to security for a second.
Sure.
Hassan asks, how does the serverless approach comply with country data residency regulations? So this is like sovereign cloud and all of that.
Sure.
That many countries request. I mean, a regulation that the data shall always be stored and processed within the boundaries. You know the drill here.
Yeah.
How? I mean, does serverless somehow gum the works up there? Does it make it easier, harder?
It doesn't gum the works up. I mean, what you see with that AWS has done for many years now is we launch what we call a region, an AWS region, which is a set of data centers that are geographically distributed in a particular part of the world. And every year we're launching more regions in new parts of the world. You know, like we've got regions in Africa, we've got regions in Asia, and a bunch in Europe and North America and South America, and expanding to more and more countries. And then within that, we do a special kind of sort of subset of a region that we call a local zone, which is kind of like a mini part of an AWS region that can expand into new countries. And so we're continuously expanding the geographic footprint of where AWS has a physical presence. And services like Lambda and Fargate are just built into those regions. They come with the region, so that when we stand that new region up, Fargate and Lambda are there. And then that means that you get all the benefits of serverless and the assurance that the actual data processing, the serverless function or the container when it runs, it's in that country.
Yep. And this is not necessarily serverless specific, of course, but it applies across that board. Guys, we're running low on time. We only got a minute or two left here. I wanted to, if you can take a moment, we want to know, did we hit the mark? Is this the kind of stuff you want to hear about, learn about? What else would you like to do? It's a quick survey. It takes, I think, a minute or two at most. But it's both in the handout section as well as in your chat. Cody Brown, our behind the scenes webinar platform managers, put a link in. If you guys would take a moment to fill out the survey, and just as an enticement to do it, we do pick two winners of, I think it's $50 Amazon gift cards for every webinar, and you have to fill the survey out to be eligible. So if you can fill that out, and Cody will get us the winners that I'll announce before we go off at the top of the hour. Nick, we only have a minute or two left. I wanted to give you a chance to wrap up.
Yeah, well, really enjoyed all of the questions and the back and forth. Like I said, that's the thing I was most looking forward to. And I hope what the audience leaves with is at least our view, an understanding of what our view is of serverless, that serverless is a mindset and a way of life and an operational model. It helps you move faster, makes it easier to deliver software faster, because of the fact of all the things that you don't have to think about so that you can focus on your application.
That's a great way to leave it. Hey, I've just been informed by Cody that we're going to be reaching out to the winners via an email. We're not supposed to announce it live anymore. They changed the rules on me. I don't know. But Nick, thank you so much for the wealth of information you shared with us today. Thanks very much to AWS for sponsoring this so that we can dig into serverless. one of the most misunderstood terms, I think, in cloud today, serverless. And thank you very much to our audience, literally from all over the world, for joining us. I can't thank you all enough, because, as I said from the outset, how good these are depends on how good you are in the audience and the questions and the give and take. Thank you all very, very much. For Alan Schimmel, myself, that's me, here at Techstrong, and all of our friends at AWS. Have a great day, everyone. Remember, we've got 4 more of these coming up, so stay tuned. For everyone who registered for this, we'll let you know when the new ones are scheduled, and hope to see you there as well. Until then, though, this is Alan Schimmel. We're out. Thank you.